Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving right into the deep end of the fascinating, highly esoteric world of the 17th century Lesser Key of Solomon. Our goal is to unpack the mystery of a very specific, highly unusual entity known as Samigina. Now, if you're familiar with demonology, you know that most entities are all about your basic human desires, right? Wealth, power, revenge. But Samigina, he is a totally different beast. He is the scholar demon. Right out of the gate, we're hit with this bizarre enigma. Think about it. On one hand, you've got the terrifying realm of necromancy, condemned souls, and dark magic, the whole shebang. On the other hand, you have the super-structured, highly respectable academic world of grammar and geometry. How on earth does a single entity perfectly balance the terrifying, shadowy realm of death with the rigid world of academic education? Well, to wrap our heads around this contradiction, we first have to look at how the classical grimoire tradition introduces this spirit.
Section 1. The Scholar Demon.
According to the Ars Goetia, Samigina is the fourth spirit in the hierarchy. He holds the middle-tier rank of Marquis, so below the kings and dukes but above the earls and knights, and under his command, exactly 30 legions of spirits. But honestly, it's how he first shows up to the magician that is absolutely captivating. He first manifests as a small horse, or a donkey, before eventually taking a human shape when commanded. Now, throughout occult and mythological traditions, horses and donkeys are classic threshold creatures. They represent this kind of stubborn wisdom. It's exactly like Balaam's ass in the Old Testament, right? The creature that could clearly see the divine messenger when the prophet himself was totally blind to it. Let's trace where this entity actually comes from and look at the highly prized knowledge he supposedly dishes out. Section 2. Grimoires and Textual Origins. Historically, we see a handful of distinct name variations popping up: Samagina, Gamagin, Gamagin, and Samagma. Now, these different spellings likely just stem from corrupted Latin or Hebrew roots being passed down through centuries of really tedious manuscript copying. You know how it goes. Some scholars even speculate the roots tie back to the Semitic word samak, which means to support, or gam, meaning also. But regardless of how you pronounce his name, his area of expertise remains remarkably consistent. The old texts explicitly state that Samigina teaches all the liberal sciences. And this is a huge deal because it brilliantly illustrates a crucial point about the grimoire tradition. The liberal sciences were the absolute bedrock of medieval and Renaissance education, the trivium and the quadrivium. The fact that a demon specializes in these respectable, noble subjects proves that early practitioners didn't just see demons as mindless, destructive forces. No, they viewed them as dangerous, hidden repositories of genuine, liberating wisdom. And as the literature evolved over time, so did Samigina's powers. He pops up in Johann Weyer's massively influential Pseudomonarchia Demonum and later on in Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire Infernal. Actually, de Plancy added a totally fascinating detail to Samigina's resume: the highly specific power to make the souls of the drowned appear in spectral form. Which brings us right to Samigina's second, far darker day job. Section 3. Speaking to the damned. When we compare him to other entities, a pretty stark contrast emerges. Sure, there are a few goetic spirits with necromantic functions, but their specialties are completely different. Bifrons, for instance, focuses on physically moving corpses and teaching the properties of herbs and stones. Murmur constrains deceased souls in general to answer questions. But Samigina? He occupies a very specific, deeply transgressive niche. He speaks of souls who died in sin. Within the Christian cosmology of these grimoires, we're talking about souls who perished without proper confession or absolution. Essentially, souls permanently trapped in purgatory or damnation. So why on earth would a practitioner risk massive spiritual contamination just to chat with the damned? Well, the historical sources point to 4 huge motivating factors. 1, they might be desperate for personal closure about the fate of an enemy or a loved one. 2, they could be hunting for hidden knowledge that literally died with a specific person. 3, maybe they want to understand the actual behind-the-scenes mechanisms of divine judgment and the afterlife. Or 4, they might want to forcefully command these condemned souls to act as their magical intermediaries. Section 4. Rituals of Evocation. So here is the million-dollar question. How did a 17th century magician actually attempt to access this forbidden mix of academic and necromantic knowledge? The historical how-to was an incredibly intense, highly structured process. It kicked off with rigorous preparation, fasting, prayer, and abstinence just to purify the operator. Then came the conjuration itself, which meant meticulous timing based on specific astrological conditions and invoking divine names to force the spirit to show up. And finally, you had the licensing to depart. Basically, a courteous but very firm banishing to properly close those spiritual channels so absolutely no unwanted influences lingered. And the physical setup was just as demanding. The magician had to build and stand inside a highly specific 9-foot protective circle, totally surrounded by inscribed divine names. They'd be dressed in consecrated vestments, usually a white robe, and armed to the teeth with tools of authority. We're talking a magical ring, a wand, and a literal sword to maintain absolute, strict dominance over the Marquis. But here is a little secret the old grimoires don't explicitly spell out for you. This exhausting, totally elaborate ritual is just as much psychological as it is spiritual. The fasting, the circles, the endless memorized incantations, this entire framework acts to induce altered states of awareness. It effectively creates a massive psychological shift, hyper-focusing the practitioner's consciousness so they can actually contact an archetype buried deep within their own unconscious mind. All right, let's zoom out from the literal magic circle for a second and look at the profound philosophical implications here. Section 5. The Philosophy of Forbidden Knowledge. Samigina does not just exist in a vacuum. He perfectly mirrors some truly ancient foundational archetypes. Compare him to Hermes Trismegistus or the Roman god Mercury. These figures were gods of communication, writing, and wisdom, sure, but they were also psychopomps, guides who led souls down into the underworld. Samigina fits this exact same pattern, showing us a deep historical human intuition. There has always been this intimate connection between the pursuit of ultimate knowledge and the realm of death. When we look at this through a modern psychological lens, external spirits actually represent internalized human potentials. So Samigina embodies our very own inherent capacity for systematic learning, logical thinking, and rigorous education. Evoking this spirit is, in reality, a dramatic, highly ritualized method of hacking into and accessing our own highest intellectual faculties. Which begs a really fascinating question. Why would the human psyche represent our capacity for education as a literal demonic entity? Well, maybe it's because genuine, liberating education demands that we confront uncomfortable, forbidden truths. It requires questioning absolutely everything you've ever been told. Deep learning, in its truest form, is always going to be a little bit transgressive. The entire grimoire tradition acts as a massive, implicit critique of institutional gatekeeping. It's suggesting that true wisdom, the kind of stuff the church or the state definitely won't teach you, requires stepping completely outside the approved channels. Trafficking with condemned souls to gain academic insight, that is the ultimate Promethean bargain. It proves that if we want genuine psychological wholeness, we can't just stare at the light. We have to integrate our shadow, and we must acknowledge the reality of death and sin. Ultimately, the scholar demon Samigina leaves us with this profound realization. Every act of learning is a small death. It is the death of our ignorance, it's the death of our comfortable certainties, and the death of our previous limitations. Seeking true knowledge means stepping across a threshold from which you simply cannot return. So as you go out and seek to understand the world around you, I'll leave you with this. What comforting illusions are you willing to let die today?